Welcome, folks. In today's demonstration, we want to discuss version controlling of test cases within the DataOps Suite and how this can help achieve true CI/CD as well. Before we jump into the demonstration on how we can integrate with, say, a Git repository, how we do merges, pushes, pulls, all those things, we're going to discuss a bit of theory on how exactly you want to foresee the vision of what we want to achieve. In any enterprise deployment, be it Agile or Waterfall, you're bound to face a particular set of branches within your workflow. So these branches represent different states of development and different set of states of the entire pipeline or systems itself. Case in point, you'll have a main or release branch, which holds the production grade code. This is something that runs, say, every day or every week, and it's not to be touched on by a lot of end personnel. But of course, nothing is static. So there's going to be developments and requirements that keep popping through within your existing projects or products. These new requirements, in most cases, are forked into a separate branch. This could be a feature branch. This could be a dev branch, where the specific changes are done in a safe environment. These changes and updates are then tested, hopefully in an automated fashion using the suite itself. And once these test cases are performed, there's a pull request that's done. There's a report that's also generated with that. And if anything is amiss, there's of course a good amount of rework. That's the entire aspect. If there are some test cases which fail, that imply that the developer has to still update those transformations or rule sets as needed. Of course, once people are satisfied with the level of changes, these test cases and the code base, once you of course see the pull request report as well, these test cases and these corresponding set of changes are pushed into the next branch. Very rarely we have just a dev and a production branch, as there is another set of nuance that a lot of architectures and topologies follow, which is a QA branch, specifically built for doing a full testing of the system. So say you had an ETL pipeline which was working on a daily basis. Now there are tons of things that get changed on it on a weekly basis. You want to make sure that these multiple set of changes that come from different branches are being done correctly. Now here, one key aspect of reusability really shines that is kind of specific to DataOps Suite, which is that if during the development of a particular feature, there are specific test cases which are created or altered, now those same test cases can be reused within the QA branch as well. Now, of course, there's a twofold use case here. We would like to make sure that the existing transformations which are not supposed to be altered are not altered. And of course, if there are any new test cases coming into play, we can directly use them as is. There's very little actual redeployment or recreation of test cases that we have to worry about. And so the pull request at the QA branch is something that's a bit more, say, spread out, making sure that multiple types of changes and sets of changes are being done to an entire system before the code weekly release, if that's a cadence that your team potentially works on. And what these also include is the fact that when you do another merge, say within this particular example, there's yet another merge to make sure that if there are any other hot fixes in the main branch, those are being taken into account with the release branch. Once this corresponding set of changes are taken care of, there's of course end-to-end validation that we have to consider as well. So this particular report, it's a BI report illustrating that a particular report which was not supposed to change has incurred some data level changes. Of course, this is just a tip of the iceberg when we discuss ETL or BI validation for that matter. It could be that multiple different things in terms of filters, transformation logic, rule sets. There could be multiple things which are affected which should not have been affected. And catching them is, of course, one of the main aspects of QA and one of the main use cases and benefits of using DataOps Suite. Catching these problem statements before the end users catches them, and of course, helping the end user fix them as well. So that is the creativity part of branching. And of course, we're not done. We can also have UAT branches, which again run on their own environment specific to specific project use cases and a lot of other hashes towards that. But the key aspect here is since we version control these different branches, you can have a repository kept for each and every branch, which could always be referred to when going back to particular use cases, reusing existing systems, and a lot more in terms of auditing and other aspects as well. Of course, this is a much more complicated feature set. And one key aspect here is within our demonstration, we'll be looking at things from a much more simpler perspective. That way it's easier for us to follow what we're trying to do. And the second aspect is, well, your entire project system or the data pipelines that you work with could work with a different set of branching altogether. So what I want to illustrate is something that can be reusable across multiple systems. So before we jump into the actual demonstration, let's discuss what we're going to run with. So here's the storyline for us to follow. Let's say there is a corresponding QA branch, and we want to make sure that we can connect this and have a repository set. So that's our very first use case, which is we're going to define our connection to Git, and we're going to make sure we can push certain branches or just have a sync done, so to speak. And that's going to be our first step, where our repository is set and we're good to go. Of course, the key aspect here is you're not going to have just a singular user. There's going to be a developer coming in. Now, of course, you can assume that this is for new requirements. This could be for updates and any other use case as well. So now you'll have a QA user and a dev user using their respective branches. And the dev user is going to first make sure that they create a fork where they can fetch the existing QA test cases itself. That's one of the key aspects. The dev is not starting by complete scratch. They have everything prepared for them directly from the QA branch itself. They're going to perform set transformation changes, which could be updating data flows in terms of, say, updating access keys, which could have been updated, or credential set, which could have been updated. There could also be updates in the existing rule sets, and of course, addition of new test cases as well. So there's a lot of things that can happen from a dev side. This isn't to show that the QA might be silent at that point. There could be a lot of changes from the QA perspective as well. And so the last thing we're going to discuss is when we kind of merge them together, how exactly things work out, how we make sure that data sources are in sync, the credentials are working across, and everything with that. And with these few set of systems, you should be good to go for any complex set of deployments as well. All right, with that, let's jump into the use case itself. What I have here are two sets of users. Firstly, I have a dev user, that's right there, and I have a QA user as well. All right. So now let's discuss what we want. The first thing we want to do is kind of set the story. This is a QA branch, as you can see, and we have a dev branch as well. And within this QA branch, I have a singular data test case here. And again, the key aspect here is this could be hundreds of test cases as well. This is, of course, the initial commit. And before you push anything into an existing branch, you need to define your connections to that. To this end, go into configuration, go into integration right there, and define the Git integration that you would like to work with. Now, in my example, I'm going ahead with an ADO Git repo. But as you will see, we have a lot of providers that we support inherently. If you want to see things in a lot more detail as to what exact credentials are needed and where to fetch them from, feel free to always go ahead to this question mark right there. There's online help. And our help documentation contains complete end-to-end systems with diagrams as well to help you get started with an integration system. Of course, if you still have more questions, the support portal is right there. So feel free to reach out to us in case that's a use case that you're working with. All right, say once you have signed up within the application itself, the thing that you have to go into is user settings right here. And here you have personal access tokens. These personal access tokens, as you can see, I've generated a few for my use cases already, and you can always generate your very own depending on the set of permissions you would like to go ahead with, particularly in releases. More information can be found within the documentation. So that's the first step, where we make sure that our integration is working as expected. So I'm just going to test this particular connection. And we see that everything is working as intended. Our integration is working as expected. Now, let's make sure we have our branch ready as well. So I'm going to go ahead into branches. Of course, this is going to differ for your specific repository, but it follows the same principle. I'm going to create a brand new branch. Let's call it QA branch. We can base it off the main branch itself, and we can create this corresponding branch. There we go. QA branch is ready right here. Now, I'm going to make sure that I go into branch mapping and I add my container QA branch to the list of branches that I see right there, which is QA branch, which is again using the same name for ease of understanding. And I'm good to go. There we go. Now we have defined our connection with Git. And as you can see, we see a star right here representing that there are changes which have not been synced with our Git repository. Of course, you can do it right here, and this is going to basically lead you into the Git section right there. And the first thing you're going to do is, of course, sync. So if I go into branches right now, you will, as expected, you'll see that this particular branch is completely empty. There won't be any files in there. And once we click a quick refresh, which is once we commit, and let's call this our initial commit. Now we have done our initial commit. And if I go back to my system, let's do a quick refresh here if I can. There we go. Our test case has been added. So that's our first step done. If I go back to the slides that we are working with, we are right here. We have basically created our initial commit. That's the first thing that we wanted to do. And now let's say there are new requirements coming in and we want to do a pull. So let's get started with that aspect. For this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my developer. Of course, this is to illustrate that multiple users are trying to work with, a single project. So we have the dev branch right here. And of course, this branch is completely empty right now. In fact, it's devoid of any use cases. It's devoid of sources as well. So this branch has nothing so far. So what do we do? Well, the first thing that we would want to do is to go back into branches right here. And I'm going to create another one. So let's have a new branch created. Let's call this dev branch. And as you can see, it's based on, oh, I guess I added a space somewhere. There we go. It's based on the QA branch itself. So let's just create it. There we go. And as you can see now, the dev branch is created out of the QA branch itself. And if I click onto it, we should see that we already have our existing test cases. And the only thing left to do is make sure we have this integration within our existing system as well. Once again, we're in the QA branch right now. So let's switch to our developer. Our developer branch is right here. The first thing we'll have to do, of course, is go into configuration, make sure that we have defined our branch and integration system right there with the branch mapping. So here, now we're going to the dev branch, making sure it's connected to the expected branch. All right, that's the first thing done. Let's click on OK. And now, if I go into sources, or if I just go into, say, Git itself, we would want to sync once again. And when we're going to sync, we are going to import a good chunk of sources as well as test cases, respectively. There we go. As you can see, the existing test cases are present and added within our system. And now you'll see the only thing left is, well, data sources. How do I take care of this? Well, for this, you will need either the developer should have access to the QA branch as well, or the QA personnel at this point can go into sources, can click on data sources and click on sync data sources. This will make sure that all the data sources that I'm working with, say the Jaffle Shop SQL Server connection, as well as 3S3 bucket, can be shared with the development branch. We'll make sure it overrides it. So it's, absolutely sure. And we sync our sources. There we go. The sources are synced. And if I switch back to my development branch, do a quick refresh, and you'll see by QA itself, we have upgraded and we have our connections as well. So now our test cases and our systems work as intended. All well and good. Now let's do the next part of our use case, which is some development, so to speak. So let's do that. The first thing I would like to change is, let's say that I want to change this transformation logic. This is ordered by, let's add a sending right there, just to kind of implement a change, so to speak. So we'll save that. And let's actually do a couple more extra changes if that's a requirement. Let's see if data quality rule can also be changed. So here within data quality, I'm going to change my subtotal limit. So it's around 9,000 at this point. Let's convert that to 9,200. Let's save right here as well. In fact, of course, I want to illustrate that as an end user, once these test cases are present, you can just run them within your existing systems as well. So everything is running as expected itself. Nothing has really been altered from that perspective. But apart from that, what I also want to do is quickly add another test case. This is to illustrate that you can, of course, will add new test cases based on the new updates and transformations that you'll be working with. While I can create a test case, I'm just going to do a quick import. And this is to illustrate that if you're working with test cases and you want to use them across systems, while Git is one way to do it, we had an older traditional method as well, which is importing and exporting. Now, this has its own use cases as well in terms of programmatically generating test cases and a lot of other use cases and systems. In our system, I've already exported an existing test case. I'm just going to directly import it. All right. And let's import it with our existing system itself. I'm just going to quickly rename it, as it's not a generative AI showcase. This is a staging to Mart test case. All right. Now we click next. Everything is already in sync. So our test case should be imported directly, and I can even view it within my system as expected. There we go. Now we have a test case that has been added and a test case that has been updated. Both of our use cases are right here. And in fact, you can also see that our systems are working as intended. So all the test cases will, of course, work right out of the gate. That's the key aspect of reusability within systems. Now, there's one other thing I'm going to change. Again, this is to illustrate that if there are any changes in the development branch or the QA branch, I can make sure we can work with them in sync. So if I go ahead and change this corresponding connection, so if I add a new user, if I change my password, like there you go, I change my password. Now, once again, what I can do is either go back to my system and make sure everything is in sync. And again, this all implies on which particular branch you would sync from. So obviously there's going to be some differences. One of them is going to override the other. And this depends on what you would like to override. So in this case, the QA branch will override the dev branch. You can do the other way around as well, where you can have the dev branch sources override the QA branch, depending on your use cases. So here you see, we have just synced once again. So now if there were any changes introduced during the development process, we are in good hands on that particular front as well. Let's do one last thing before we jump into the other use case, which is the fact that our QA personnel is not going to sit empty-handed here. So let's say that the QA personnel as well is going to say update a corresponding rule. Let's update something that we know we have updated in the other use case as well. So in our sub total limit, which is a simple rule to check if this is less than 9,000, let me update this to 9,900 just to showcase that again. We're going to capture some changes and conflicts. And let's keep the test case as is. In fact, let's change this particular test case. Let's call it customer rank order. We're not changing the actual order by condition. As a QA personnel, we believe it's correct. We're just going to rename this for another set of use cases. So let's give it a quick save right there. And now you'll see that again, there's a star mark right there and a star mark right here, indicating there are new changes which have not been synced with the repository yet. So what do we do now? Well, the first thing we have to do is go back to our diagram to illustrate what we are going to achieve. So now that we have our dev branch and say the developer is actually happy with all the changes and the pull request is approved. So let's simulate the pull request and associate our dev branch with the QA branch as well. For this, we're going to go into ADO once again. And in fact, before we get into ADO, there's one tiny thing that I've missed, which is, of course, pushing this to our expected branch. This is something that, again, we need to make sure. That's why we have a star right there, which illustrates that we are updating rule limit plus transformation logic. Again, get messages are much more kind of comprehensive and have a lot more things usually associated with them. There we go. So now we have committed the changes into a dev branch. So now if I go back to my existing system and let's switch branches a little. If I open a branch right here, let's open up this particular branch. Oh, I would like to open the files. There we go. You'll see that our test cases have also been added, the new one as well as the update. So now what do we do? Well, we always have to do a pull request. That's our entire use case here. So let's do a pull request. We're going to pull dev into QA. And what we're also going to do, I think that's more or less it. So let's make sure we can pull them into QA. And I see there's a few use cases right there. And let's create this. There we go. Our pull request has been created. Now the only thing left to do is for an end user to come in and approve and complete it. So I'm just going to skip ahead that process and I'm click on complete. And I'm going to merge them directly. Again, you can choose what you want to do. I'm going to choose not to delete the dev branch as there could be other use cases I might want to do. So I click on complete merge right there. All right, there we go. The pull request has been updated. So if I go back to branches now, and if I go to QA branch, you'll see within the QA branch, these test cases have been added. We need to make sure that the same is reflected from our system as well. So we go ahead to Git. And now we're going to perform a pull. So when we're going to perform a pull, there's going to be a couple of things. As you can see, the one that's highlighted is as what we expect. So of course, there's a test case which was added specifically. And for one of them, we have a conflict. And here we see that the query specifically has been altered between our two systems. So now you get to choose what commits over what. So I can just close this right now. And I'm going to put a commit. And we're going to overwrite and commit this. And we're done. Now within our test cases, if I go back to this particular test case, you'll see that the query that we had worked with originally, that we had updated, is present right here. And of course, the same is true for the rule set that we were working with as well. Our subtotal limit check is as expected at 9,900. So that's basically what we wanted to cover. This is the key aspect of the fourth step, which is what we do after merging. And of course, if there are new changes in dev, or if you want to resync data sources, you have complete freedom to do that. And you can make as many branches of dev, of QA, and other aspects as well. So that was the basics of CI/CD in terms of how we can achieve through CI/CD. This is the main layout for that. Version control along with automation can really help boost the overall automation systems and efficiency of your end users as well as your QA personnel. So it really helps with that. So this was what we wanted to cover at the end, which is a sample use case of how we can commit changes to Git, how we can do pull requests, merge, how exactly the application deals with conflicts, how we can sync data sources across multiple users and systems as well. If there are any other questions, once again, feel free to reach out to us at Datagaps. And again, if you are a customer, feel free to use the support portal for any further queries. Thank you for your time.